Hey, what's going on, everybody? TujoPanda back in action, talking about something else today. About something else, I don't know if you all know this, but I absolutely love Halloween. The aesthetic, the style, the theme, the premise, the memories. I'm part of that weird generation of millennial where Halloween meant you got to wear a costume, go out door to door with your little trick-or-treat basket, backpack, or, if you were poor, pillowcase. Hold it out and say, trick-or-treat. Usually you get a fistful of candy. Unless the house had other ideas like handing out little Bibles or pocket change, as in coins or office supplies, maybe even school supplies, McDonald's coupons, random things like that. Never got tricked that I can remember, but yeah, it's always a magical time of the year. But kind of tragic how these days the traditions kind of died off. Not without reason. It's kind of dangerous these days with the added insight and paranoia fueled by shit you see on TikTok and Twitter. You probably don't want groups of unaccompanied minors just wandering the neighborhoods at night. Plus, with the internet, smartphones, and social media, not to mention Fortnite, Minecraft, Roblox, I'd imagine most kids would rather just stay home. Lazy little shits. Nah, it'd probably be the same way if that stuff was available to me at the time. Probably for the best anyway, with all these damn pedophiles you keep hearing about getting exposed practically every other day. Not that Minecraft or Roblox proved to be any safer, but at least the risk of physical contact is usually pretty low. See, back then, about all you really had to worry about was the possibility of a razor blade or a needle or some other adulteration of the candy you'd be getting, like loose staples or other nasty things. You got some pretty sick fucking people out there. Now, as a kid, I only had a vague understanding about what Halloween was even about in the first place. You wear a scary costume to scare off ghosts and ward off evil spirits or some shit like that. Not sure how Captain Kirk's gonna scare away evil spirits, because I wore a Star Trek costume as a kid, even though I definitely preferred Star Wars and barely even watched Star Trek to begin with. My parents just kind of assumed I was into that sort of thing, I guess. Typical. And I wasn't even cool enough to be Captain Kirk. I was just some generic crewmate. I remember it being like raspberry red, so guess I was part of security or engineering. And even though I was Asian, I was the wrong kind of Asian. Think K-pop versus J-pop. So I couldn't even be Zulu, who was a science guy with a blue uniform. But I did get to dress up as an army man with my dad's old fatigues, which elicited some funny comments from some households. My father actually didn't want me wearing his old army fatigues, citing concerns about some stories from his early years after the Vietnam War happened, like kids getting shot at for dressing up as soldiers after running into a family that lost their child to the war. You know, their only son who went overseas to fight and serve and never returned. And seeing kids dressed like the army that took their son in the first place skulking around the neighborhood during Halloween night's gotta be pretty fucked up for the mother or father that never got to see their kid again. But yeah, that was a long time ago though. Other than a few facetious remarks or sarcastic comments, I didn't experience anything bad. Your tax dollars hard at work, or man, recruitment must be getting pretty desperate to be taking in a kid like you, or oh no, the UN's right on my front doorstep. Most of these went right over my head, obviously. I was just some dumb kid who really wanted some candy. Don't fully remember what all was said to me that night. Anyway, as far as my costume goes, I had my nice little forest camo shirt, I had my nice little forest camo pants, my M65 field jacket, sometimes a web belt draped over it with nothing on it, and an M1 steel helmet, no liner. Sometimes I'd just wear the olive green drab shirt and pants with a puke brown t-shirt worn underneath. For some reason, my father will always come back home from work at Aberdeen Proving Grounds wearing that. Okay, so I completely forgot about this. I actually had to look through some old photo albums for these, but apparently I had a Ninja Turtle costume when I was even younger. Yeah, hard to believe, I know. That was supposed to be what a Ninja Turtle looks like, apparently. Looks just like them, don't it? Spot the fucking difference. The Ninja Turtles were actually pretty popular back in the 90s and clearly left an impression on me when I was younger. Now, if you're curious, my father had just gotten back from the Gulf War, dressed up in some pretty modern desert fatigues. He served admirably, with the base he'd been stationed at supposedly getting bombed a week after he'd left, so lucky break, huh? He even brought me back a Raphael Ninja Turtles doll from some Middle Eastern bazaar over in Saudi Arabia. Nah, those weren't the military fatigues I ended up wearing, by the way. Doesn't quite sync up to forest camo or olive green drab that I mentioned just now. In any case, you can see my trick-or-treat basket that I'd end up using for many years, and the basket underneath full of candies. My old neighborhood growing up was a little suburban development called Harbor Oaks, deep in Edgewood, Maryland, and was shaped kind of like a big ovalish square, with little small developments snaking around the interior to make a series of cul-de-sacs like you'd see from Ed, Edd and Eddy. The goal was to hit every single house, and I do mean every single house. Run the gauntlet, get all the candy. All the candy. It never happened. I usually get about halfway with whoever I was with at the time before it got too late, or we just got tired and gave up and went home. The development was big enough that everything was interconnected by roads, so you typically have to drive to get around, so, a 6-year-old, 7-year-old kid ain't doing all that in one night. See, Harbor Oaks was about as middle class as you could get. Lower middle class, thinking back on it now. Normal, small to medium-sized homes, all standing row after row in neat little plots, one after the other. I lived on Sounding Drive, one of the longest roads at the very back of the neighborhood. These were all working-class people, or retirees, my parents included. Nothing extravagant. What you see is what you get. And what I got was a whole fuck ton of candy. Wilford Brimley would be proud. Diabetes. Now, most houses would have a designated person at the door that would receive your company and have a big pot or bowl of candy to hand out. Usually mom, dad, maybe an older sibling. They'd talk to you for a few moments, and you'd be on your way to the next house. And there are always a lot of other groups of kids around with chaperones and shit like that, so you never really felt unsafe or worried about something actually happening. Then you get these houses that would just forego having someone actually being posted at the door, and instead have a big pot or bowl of candy on the front stoop with a little sign either inviting you to take as much as you wanted, or reminding you to leave some for the rest of the kids. I may have taken an extra handful or two of candy. Or 5. In any case, you'd be able to live off that candy for weeks, maybe even a month or two, depending on how much you got. Now, as far as the candy itself goes, it was all fairly diverse, with a nice mix of variety. Obviously, candy bars are probably going to attract my attention the most. Anything from Snickers, Butterfingers, Twix, Milky Way, Three Musketeer bars, Crunch bars, 100 Grand, Baby Ruth, shit like that. These were all quote-unquote fun size, by the way, so don't think you were getting a full-size candy bar like you'd see at 7-Eleven, except on an exceedingly rare occasion by an exceedingly generous donor. Then you get things I'd classify as just plain sugar candies. Shit like Skittles, Starburst, things like that. It's about this time I'd be introduced to a candy I grew to hate. Good and Plenty. I don't know why they call it Good and Plenty. Shit tastes like raw licorice, and while I'll eat raw licorice, it's not a taste I particularly like. So it wasn't good. Bad and shit's more accurate in that way I saw it. Now, bubblegum came in a small variety, but the two brands I remember the most were Bazooka Joe and Super Bubble, or Double Bubble. Bazooka Joe and Super Bubble were high tier, and Double Bubble was kind of low tier. Had a gross aftertaste to me, so I didn't like it. And besides, Bazooka Joe always had those neat little comics that you could read after the fact, so clearly the superior bubblegum here. Then you got things that kind of fell outside of the typical generic candies. Shit like Smarties, Nerds, bottle caps, those weird little jelly hamburgers that you got to put together yourself, pretzels. Don't know how pretzels qualifies as candy. They always packaged them in those dark purple bags to make them sort of Halloween themed, but it always felt like a cop-out snack that got tacked on, even for little 7-year-old me. For a while, my Halloween buddy, as far as the buddy system goes, was a guy called Chris who just kind of tolerated me in my presence. He was really the only kid on my block that lived in the house right across the street facing my house, but he was several years older than me. Sure, there used to be 2 girls down the street, Nikki and Stacy, white girl and black girl, who were both close to my age, but both of them ended up moving away. After that, it was all middle-aged or old people living here, besides Chris. Now, Chris had Legos and Nintendo 64, so you definitely bet I'd go over there sometimes, but he was kind of a weird kid. He looked normal enough, but was super autistic up the wazoo. I was just kind of hyperactive by comparison, and his parents looked like they were still living in the 1970s. Halloween time, he'd always have the absolute best costumes money could buy, homemade for parts of the costume that you couldn't buy. Usually something Star Wars or sci-fi related, like his bang-ass Boba Fett costume. It wouldn't be until years later that he'd actually end up moving away, and I'd have to go across the way to the next development over called Willoughby Woods. You know, I've never actually experienced anything remotely paranormal on Halloween, which is kind of disappointing. I'm kind of like Mulder from the X-Files, where I want to believe in things like aliens, ghosts, goblins, cryptids, and things like that, but my suspension of disbelief is practically non-existent, where I'm just too grounded to believe in things like that. Granted, I generally always stuck by well-populated areas and was usually around other people, because when you're alone and your senses are heightened, your imaginations can just run wild and make it seem like something's going on. Like, there's a greater significance to the, sounds and movements around you at that point, depending on how fearful of a child you are. So yeah, no creepy-ass ghost stories or serial killers that were stalking me, that I know of. Imagine nearly having a run-in with a serial killer that was stalking you, but they got interrupted or maybe lost interest when a more attractive target walked by and drew their attentions away from you. And you didn't find out about that until years later. That would be creepy. See, I'm pretty desensitized and too much of a skeptic as an adult to most horror elements, but as a kid, yeah, I'll admit it. I was a scaredy cat when it came to this sort of thing. I hated the dark, and I would always squint when going through something like a haunted house to the point that I ran right into a fucking fake wall when my friend Matt had to guide me through the interiors of a quote-unquote spooky mansion. Experiencing something like Luigi's Mansion would probably be about as scary to me as experiencing Hellraiser or John Carpenter's The Thing firsthand. Movies and games had that sort of effect on me, but maybe it's just because I'd exposed myself to these sorts of experiences like that it played into desensitizing me as an adult. Like, I thought the Redeads and Gibdos from Legend of Zelda were fucking scary. So you know I was in for a bad time during the Under the Well dungeon and the Shadow Temple. Or Resident Evil 2 was fucking scary to me. I didn't want to be touched by zombies. And in a police station full of them, that was kind of hard to pull off. Return of the Living Dead was also scary to me, though watching again as an adult, it's more funny than it is scary, so I don't know what I was on about. Now, as far as the typical activities you expect to see or partake in on Halloween night, it's about what you expect. And like the wiggity wiener I was at that age, I did a little bit of everything. Like bobbing for motherfucking apples. See, I was part of the Boy Scouts, or Cub Scouts back then, and there was a pavilion hall up at the American Foreign Legion that would host us for group activities nights. So yeah, I did bob for motherfucking apples and did shit like that. Fun when you're a kid trying it out for the first time. Lame as hell as an adult. An old-fashioned steel tin bathtub filled to the brim with water with a whole bunch of motherfucking apples floating in the water. Very unhygienic, because that was probably just tap water, and depending on how many kids bobbed for apples before you, yeah, that's a whole lot of loose saliva just kind of contaminating lukewarm water. Not good. I think the apples were marked somehow, so if you were lucky and picked the right one, you won something. Probably just more candy. I never won, but I probably didn't miss much. As for the other things I can remember, they turned the very back of the pavilion hall into a haunted house. Now, haunted houses are generally places you can go out to get scared, but not every area has one you can just go to. So, some creative households would turn their garage or shed into an improvised haunted house. Now, obviously, a garage ain't the same size as a house, so it's more like a haunted shed more than anything else, but it's definitely rare and different, and in some cases, an ingenious use of space, where black sheets, glow-in-the-dark decor, and black lights make for an appealing liminal space for you to enjoy, where a kid's imagination will make the garage's interior seem bigger than it really is. Now, one of my favorite things, whether it were the adults sitting on a porch or these improvised haunted houses in the garage, was where an adult would dress up like a zombie or something like that. And as a kid, you kind of have a hard time figuring out whether it was a static object you were looking at or someone just standing really still until you got close enough to get grabbed. Because that was fun. You'd think it was just a statue or a sculpture or something like that, and the person would either move or say something, and you'd be momentarily surprised or scared. Now, it was about that time that my grandma actually sewed me up a Link costume from Legend of Zelda. The hat was probably the best part, but the rest of it was made out of cheap-ass felt. Now, I don't know if you all are familiar with felt, but felt gets kind of scratchy when it touches your skin after a while. And yes, I wore the little white tights underneath, just like Link does for some reason. Still, she did a really good job, even though all most people saw me as was either Peter Pan, or Robin Hood, or some generic-ass elf child. Guess I overestimated the popularity of Nintendo back then. In any case, Willoughby Woods was kind of new, and the kids that lived there were far closer to my age. Kids like Michael, who was probably my best friend for many years, Earl, Chris, Brian, and others along the way. But as more people from Baltimore began moving out to the suburbs, the neighborhood got a little unsafe, as shootings, robberies became a little bit more commonplace, prompting my parents to consider moving to greener pastures. Now, my family would end up moving to a little neighborhood called Cedar Day, and let me tell you, the people there had some money. In the early days, the whole community was in on Halloween, usually older folks who remembered things like tradition, giving a care, and would even invite you into their house for some apple cider, caramel apples, cinnamon donuts, but that was all pretty short-lived. That was about the time I got to be a little bit too old to go out tricking and treating, so I just kind of stopped one day. By then, Halloween was more about Scary Vidja Games, scary movies, wearing costumes, as in cosplay, going out to parties, shit like that. But I always felt a little guilty having spent my entire childhood getting to go out tricking and treating. So as a teenager transitioning to becoming an adult, I decided to go out and hand out some candy, usually with a buddy I could bullshit with along the way, like my buddy Tyler. Tyler was kind of like me in the sense that we were both middle-class kids that lived a typical middle-class life, though he was a weeb and I was a furry. Now, I was one of the good ones to him, so he'd tolerate my furriness, but he did have some fairly critical and cynical views about furries in general. Not that I blame him. He was always up to date about the latest and greatest anime titles, and me, I just kind of liked what I liked. But we'd always rejoice gossiping about the latest and greatest internet dramas, which, at the time, usually centered around bullshitting about Chris Chan or Andrew Dobson, aka Tom Preston. He's a shitty artist, by the way. Our time handing out candy was pretty short-lived too, by the way, because most kids I trick-or-treated with in the same neighborhood were now my age, and the next generation of kids were few and far between. So I'd see maybe 2 or 3 waves of kids and then nothing else for the rest of the night. Apparently, most families at this point would just kind of take their kids out for a little something called trunk or treat. They'd take over a parking lot somewhere, and the theory is that all families present should know one another or know of one another, so no risk of Creeper McCreeperson white pedo van showing up to snatch a kid or two when nobody's looking. Stranger danger and all that sort of thing. Now, I can understand why this would be preferable from a parent's perspective, but it's not the same, goddammit. Like, at all. Because unless you decorate that car like the gruesome twosome from Wacky Races, the beauty of going house to house was the contrast in houses and the level of effort people would take in decorating their front yards to fit the Halloween theme. As far as my actual memories of it all go, I remember walking along the beige gray sidewalks running parallel to the roads in Old Harbor Oaks. It's clear, dark clouds obscuring the silver limelight of the moon just peeking through. The air, it's brisk and kind of cold, like the onset of winter just coming on. The sounds of ghouls and goblins giggling against corny Halloween music can be heard in the distance as the silhouettes of ghosts appear on the sides of houses, in the contrasts of purple, orange, and red. Smallish groups of kids all around me shuffle and lurk in the darkness amidst quiet murmurs and talking. While you never do it on any other occasion without reason, somehow there's no fear in walking the long walkway or the driveway up to the stranger's house to pull on the screen door and knock on their main door. The door opens, and between houses, it can be anybody between some middle-aged dude with a dad bod, a portly mother-looking woman, or an older girl looking like an older sister. They receive you warmly, mischievously, or awkwardly, then heft a bowl of candy and drop a handful into your basket. Homes with a wider porch look like miniature crypts or are styled in such a way to look like an extension of a spooky house, all adorned with little jack-o'-lantern lamps strung up like Christmas lights. Fake cobwebs and spiderwebs strewn about their bushes and shrubs along the gardens, while motifs of crypts and graves mark the yard like a makeshift graveyard. And when you actually get up on the front porch, that statue that you thought was just a statue reaches out to grab you. It's one of the adults in costume, but it's okay. They give you a little more candy for pulling one over on you. It makes you look at any other statues or mannequins along the way that much harder as you go to the next house. By now, you made it a good ways through the neighborhood. While the sun was just going down when you had started, it's well enough dark by this point. The disparate groups of costumed kids that huddled in groups all around you become fewer and far between, as even some of the adults that's out on their stoops and porches have since gone inside now, leaving an empty chair in their wake. Some have even turned out their lights, making for a less attractive home to approach the trick-or-treat at. The air is just a little bit colder now, which didn't bother you much before with the costume you've been wearing, but it's definitely starting to nip at your face, ears, and nose. You don't know what time it is because you didn't bring a watch. And there's no cell phone to check because cell phones didn't exist like they do now. While you're not exactly scared, a few occasions might have gotten you spooked. An animal rustling in the trees near the woods where you pass through might have made the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end as your imagination runs wild trying to figure out what it was. Some of the older kids, hanging out, smoking cigarettes, or doing things, look less than friendly and make mean-spirited comments under their breath. I'm gonna get you, I'm gonna get you. It's only when you and your friend are the only ones out there that you truly begin to feel self-conscious. You're no longer participating in an activity that's being enjoyed by others now. It's late, you've got nowhere else to go, except home. Your friend complains you're tired, so you begin the long walk back. And Halloween, as far as you're concerned, is more or less over. You get back home, take your costume off, put on your PJs, which for me was just a t-shirt over some sweatpants, and pour your candy on the bed to see what you got. You just kind of sat there and munched on some of it, relishing all the sights and sounds you experienced that night, before your parents came in to tell you to put your ass to bed. And then it was over. all gone now. Because I don't recall any of that shit when I was in my teenage years going on to becoming an adult. So from then on, Halloween kind of lost its luster, magic, and charm for me, and it was relegated to being just another day of the year. Which it is, just with a little bit more decor and style. Although reminders and media would definitely keep the dream and memories alive. Animal Crossing and Kingdom Hearts definitely come readily to mind in that sense, namely for the Halloween Town aesthetic. There's something about the Halloween aesthetic that hits harder than most other holidays and holds an appeal to me, even in a video game or IRL. Black and orange stand out as the likeliest colors you'll see amidst the pumpkins, bat silhouettes, spiders, cobwebs, ghosts, and other creepy crawlies. Animal Crossing follows the calendar year, and holidays typical of that date in America will occur, even when you're not playing. And each holiday is special in the sense that you'll run into a particular character or two, with there being an event amongst the other animal villagers. You can buy candy and receive it? I can't fully remember. Maybe I'll have to go back and play it again sometime. I just remember villagers either coming over or you having to go over there, and that raccoon man, Tom Nook, having nothing but candy available for sale at a shop that he'd restock as soon as you left and came back. As for Halloween Town, imagine an entire town decorated like it's Halloween all day, every day, populated by scary-ass people like Jack Skellington. Jack basically tries to take over Christmas after capturing Santa Claus and trying to celebrate Halloween on Christmas instead, but things don't go over too well when the military basically fires anti-aircraft cannons on him while taking Santa's sleigh out for a little bit of a joyride. Then there's Pumpkin Hill from Sonic Adventure 2 that just kind of existed by virtue of being a random-ass place in the Sonic Adventure universe. The game itself was not Halloween-themed, by the way, but the location definitely was for no discernible reason. Pumpkins carved like big old jack-o'-lanterns, with a big one in the skybox just leering at you from a distance, while ghosts and goblins and things are just prowling the countryside as you jump from hill to hill over the chasm. All the while, you be treated to that smooth rap in the background with, admittedly, dumbass lyrics. But it's a kid's game, so I get it. Can't be dropping no F-bombs in the kid's game, or cursing. Though you can get pretty close these days. Anyway, I moved again later as an adult, and by now, no trick-or-treating ever happened at all. I remember buying 2 bags of candy to distribute, only for no trick-or-treaters to be forthcoming. The neighborhood I moved to was characterized by the narrow roads that didn't give people a whole lot of room to move around in case you had to get away with a passing car. And people just kind of blow through here like it's Indianapolis 500. I should know! I've been trying to soundproof my room to keep out the noise, and it's already ruined a couple of videos I've already been working on prior. Probably not the safest or most accommodating for roving bands of kids or young people just passing through. Then I'd see ads for trunk-or-treat events, like I saw today. Well, that explains that. With incidents of violence taking place, like muggings, robberies, people just generally being mean-spirited assholes, on top of the gun violence and mass shootings, I guess that's a better outcome than something actually happening. But it's kind of a shame, really. Thinking about what was is no more. Guess I kind of lucked out in that sense, huh? I got to trick-or-treat throughout my whole childhood, and come time I grew to adulthood, my turn was a few short stints, and now I can pretty much do whatever I want on a Halloween night, guilt-free. Attend parties, watch scary movies, live stream scary games. The tradition wasn't completely dead now that I think of it. See, a friend of mine actually moved to the big city of Baltimore and lives in a pretty safe area, all things considered. Tall and thin row homes all stacked together in neat little rows on their own little streets. That's the last time I saw trick-or-treating happening in real time, although that was right before COVID-19 killed most other things we enjoyed, like all-you-can-eat China buffets. When is the last time you've seen an all-you-can-eat China buffet? His husband would dress up in fursuit and he'd dish out the candy. And a few kids actually had the nerve to not only shit on furries verbally, either from a distance or under their breath, but sheepishly come on back to ask for some candy. What a bunch of little shits. Thanks, Ruben Sim, you dick. From now on, anytime kids hate on furries, I'm just going to blame it on Ruben Sim for preaching the hate. I guess the real tragedy here is the deterioration of a sense of community and the death of tradition by proxy, where families could do something truly magical for the kids and feeding into their imaginations, while also giving them a sweet treat to snack on. This is all predicated on tradition that adults do for their children and their neighbors' children, and possibly snot-nosed brats that come in from neighboring worse-off neighborhoods. No more, depending on where you live. Now, my one British friend, she's not all about that Halloween life. She sees it as just a means of training kids to be panhandlers, panhandling for some candy. Buy the fucking Mars bars and Malmars yourself, Sharon, and stop trying to shame me to fulfill your kids' snack-munching habits, Sharon. God! And it's like, I get it, but what a cynical and sad take to make. I guess thinking about it all after the fact, Honestly, kind of thankful to all the adults that were nice enough to give a care and keep the tradition alive for me to enjoy throughout my entire childhood. The effort was one undertaken by adults in wanting to do something nice for the kids, bringing the community together while celebrating an age-old holiday, even if they didn't have kids themselves. And you know what? That's pretty fucking awesome. It's too bad you don't really see that strong sense of community anymore in but a few places in 2024. I say that while thinking about how little I interact with my neighbors and just kind of go to work, come home, work on hobbies, but well, as long as there aren't any axe murderers or pedophiles living near me, I think that's alright. Now, as an adult, Halloween meant something else entirely to me now. Before the innovations of VR chat and all that would entail, there was a furry convention by the name of Fur Fright, but Fur Fright since changed from Fur Fright to Furpocalypse by the time I ended up attending, and generally always took place right around the time of Halloween weekend. So I went there for a few years before COVID hit. A furry convention taking place on Halloween weekend? Hell yeah! Always a good time there, even though it was kind of small and the hotel kind of fell into disrepair to the point mushrooms began growing in the carpets. I don't think the place ever fully recovered. Actually, come to think of it, I think that might have been Philadelphia's original hotel right around the King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. Nah, this took place deep in Cheshire, Connecticut. Now, movies-wise, the original Halloween series was always my favorite around Halloween time. Michael Myers going out of his way to kill off his family for no explicable reason while simultaneously having an impossibly high endurance and borderline immortality. They just refer to him as the Shape in the script, being this unstoppable force of evil going out of his way to kill Laurie Strode, back during a time when high schoolers in the movies looked like they were about 30. Yeah, the movie hasn't aged well, but it still holds a special place in my heart as the embodiment of Halloween, and not that stupid-ass spin-off Halloween 2 where Michael didn't come back. It was all about the spirit of Halloween and harvesting Stonehenge to bring about a time of witchcraft and sorcery. Turns out, the reason Michael Myers was killing off his immediate family was brought on by some weird ritual brought on by the Cult of Thorn as part of the Samhain ritual to increase their power and influence in the world. The story got really weird and stupid in the later movies, but well. Now I enjoy Halloween in the virtual world. Subtle and overt reminders of my distant past and yesteryear embodied by the decor appearing in the various worlds I go to explore and enjoy, or play games in. The jack-o'-lanterns and candles glowing in the darkness contrasted by the gravestones and headstones along with the particle effects of ghouls and ghosts and other spirited things. It's a pretty solid theme, all things considered. At least stores like Spirit Halloween still exist to remind me that some people still give a care about dressing up in costume and enjoying the holiday, though the quality generally leaves a lot to be desired. Make your own costume if you have the time to do it rather than buying overpriced junk. It just oozes meme potential with how topical some of the costumes can be. Now, I will admit, I did buy the Gray Fox fursuit head, the only one I cared for as far as the collection of rip-off Chinese-made, mass-produced fursuit heads go. I find it horribly ironic that the corporations have put more of an effort into keeping the spirit of Halloween alive and providing the products that people want to buy, as opposed to the consumers that just kind of buy into it blindly. Be it costumes, decor, candy. The corporatization and commercialization of Halloween has made for some cheap-ass mass-produced costumes decor, making for a convenient option for people to buy, but takes away from the beauty of people's creativity and just making it themselves. Looking into it more deeply as an adult, well, Halloween is probably seen as a bastardization of the Gaelic festival Samhain by clueless redneck Protestants such as myself. I only ever heard of Samhain through the movie Halloween about Michael Myers, when Dr. Loomis, aka Donald Pleasance, studies it on the chalkboard during the third movie. See, Samhain, or Samhain itself, was a pagan festival from ancient times that was meant to celebrate the dead so far as honoring one's ancestors while also simultaneously warding off evil spirits. Like most Christian holidays, it was incorporated from its pagan roots into All Saints' Day by Pope Gregory III in the 8th century. It was a time to light big bonfires and engage in little activities like bobbing for motherfucking apples while offering food and drink to the gods to ensure that the village and their livestock survived the harsh winter. It kind of reminds me of Silent Hill insofar as it was supposed to be a time where the boundaries separating the real world and the other world were blurred in such a way to create a sort of liminal space where ordinary people can encounter and interact with spirits and other supernatural beings. See, a lot of what we do during Halloween was actually influenced by various Celtic-speaking countries like Scotland and Ireland, though the absence of pumpkins over there meant they had to use things like turnips or beets. And the significance of costumes comes from the practice that started in the Middle Ages called mumming or souling, which then turned into guising here in the States. Mumming's basically where amateur minstrels or actors of a troupe get to perform on Halloween, explaining the costumes, and guising is where you just wear the costume to give the impression of being what you're dressed as. I was half right as a kid, by the way. Wearing costumes was meant to imitate or ward off supernatural beings like ghosts or monsters. So all those jack-o'-lanterns that you see carved with ghoulish faces were meant to scare away evil spirits. Now, it wasn't really until mass migration of Irish and Scottish people came to the US in the 1800s did Halloween really become part of the traditions here, which then proceeded to spread to various other parts of the world for them to put their own spin on it. I don't know what I'm going to do on Halloween this year. Probably just watch scary movies with friends or goof off on VR chat. While I don't necessarily have a virtual costume on hand, I do have plenty of costumes IRL I can fall back on. Having beaten Faith, the Unholy Trinity, I do have Priest Garb, so I can beat John and his fucked up ass. But hey, is there still trick-or-treating going on where you live? What was Halloween like for you as a kid? What's Halloween like for you now? I really hope it means something a little bit more than just another day of the year, or a fistful of candy you took from work. Anyways, till next time, boys and girls, have a better one. Good night, and happy Halloween.
Before I go, there is one thing I'd like. You have a recent case. A case, say, in the last year or two that might be of interest. How big? Very along with the article. Something a little, you know... you know how they are. Well, the dance hall racket might interest you.
Happy Halloween, kid. Oh, I got you good, didn't I?
Man.